"One more thing," she said, her voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. "What can I do to make you more comfortable with the babies being there?" The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating, over the remnants of our dinner. It wasn't a question at all. It was a statement. A declaration that my feelings, my fiancé's wishes, and our carefully made plans for our own wedding were nothing more than minor inconveniences to be managed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, chilling silence. I looked across the table at my mother-in-law, her face a perfect mask of faux concern. Beside her, my fiancé's visiting grandmother stirred her tea, oblivious. In that single, condescending sentence, the truth became brutally clear. This was never a negotiation. It was a hostile takeover. My name is Eliza, and for the past 5 years, my home has not been my own. It started when my fiancé's parents sold their house and moved in with us, rent-free. The official story, the one repeated at every family gathering, was that they wanted to be close to their grandchildren. My sister-in-law, Amy, had just given birth to twins, and our home was conveniently located. But the reality was far more complicated. Our lives became an extension of theirs. Our schedule, our space, our peace, it was all slowly eroded, consumed by constant family obligations. I'm a planner, meticulous and organized by nature. I find comfort in lists and spreadsheets, in knowing that every detail has been considered. But I could never plan for the creeping sense that I was a guest in my own house. I tried to keep the peace because that's who I've always been. I avoid conflict. I look for the middle ground, the compromise that can make everyone happy. For 5 years, I compromised. I accepted that our living room was their television room, that our kitchen was their social hub, and that our quiet evenings were a thing of the past. Then came the wedding, our wedding. After years of saving and planning, this was supposed to be the one day that was truly ours. My fiancé and I were a team, pouring our hearts into every detail of our DIY celebration. We wanted it to be a reflection of us, a fun, relaxed party for our friends and family, a celebration of the life we were finally ready to start. Because of that, we made the difficult decision to have a child-free wedding. We wanted our guests, especially the parents in our lives, to have a real night off. We wanted them to let loose, to dance, to celebrate with us without worrying about nap schedules or crying babies. When we first announced it, my sister-in-law, Amy, was thrilled. I remember her exact words. "Oh, thank God," she'd said, laughing. "I cannot wait for one night where I don't have to be a mom." It was a relief to hear her say it. I thought, for once, this would be easy. I was wrong. A few months later, the campaign began. It started subtly, with little comments dropped into conversation by my mother-in-law. "It's just a shame the twins will miss seeing their uncle get married," she'd sigh, looking wistfully into the distance. Amy's tune changed completely. Suddenly, the idea of leaving her 1-year-olds with a sitter for a few hours was an unbearable tragedy. They became a united front of emotional blackmail. Every phone call, every visit, became an opportunity to chip away at our decision. They painted us as selfish, as people who didn't understand the sacred bond of family. They dismissed our every attempt at compromise. We offered to pay for a top-tier babysitter at their nearby hotel. We even suggested flying in a trusted relative to watch the twins. Every offer was rejected with a passive-aggressive wave of the hand. "Oh, you just don't get it," Amy would say, her tone implying I was cold and heartless. "They need their mommy." It was a masterclass in manipulation, designed to make me feel like the villain for simply wanting our wedding day to be our own. I saw their motivation with perfect clarity. This wasn't about the twins' well-being. It was about control. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were used to being the center of the family's universe, and the twins were their ultimate tool for commanding attention. Our wedding wasn't our day to them. It was just another stage where they could perform their roles as doting mother and grandmother. The stakes were so much higher than just one day. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was a test. If we couldn't hold this one, single boundary for the most important day of our lives, our marriage would be dictated by their whims forever. My fiancé, who had spent his entire life unable to say no to them, was finally learning to stand with me. This was our first real battle as a united front. Which brought us to this dinner, 4 days before our wedding. The air was already thick with unspoken tension. We had just finished discussing the final logistics for the reception. I thought, foolishly, that we had finally moved past the issue. I thought they had accepted our decision. But my mother-in-law saw her opening. With her own mother there as an audience, she leaned forward and delivered her final, devastating blow. "What can I do to make you more comfortable with the babies being there?" I stared at her, the polite, conflict-avoidant part of my brain short-circuiting. The meticulous planner in me, who had spent a year on seating charts and floral arrangements, felt a surge of cold fury. All my attempts at gentle negotiation and respectful discussion were pointless. She had never listened. She had only been waiting for the perfect moment to declare her victory. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ambush. She had cornered me, using her mother's presence as a shield, believing I wouldn't dare make a scene. She was so confident, so arrogant in her lifelong control over her son, that she couldn't imagine a world where her demands weren't met. I felt something inside me shift. The part of me that always sought compromise, that always tried to smooth things over, went silent. It was replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. She thought she was making her final move. She had no idea she had just armed me to make mine. She had no idea she had just armed me to make mine. Something inside me didn't just snap, it crystallized. The years of being a polite pushover, of bending and twisting myself to maintain a false sense of family harmony, evaporated in an instant. It wasn't an explosion of hot anger. It was the exact opposite. A sudden, chilling calm washed over me, clear and absolute. I lifted my gaze from my plate and looked her dead in the eye. The manufactured concern on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. My voice, when it came out, was low and steady, devoid of the tremor she expected. "We are not comfortable with the babies being there." The words hung in the air, solid and final. The faint clinking of the grandmother's spoon against her teacup stopped. My mother-in-law's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She had expected tears, arguments, a pleading defense. She had not expected a simple, unbreakable fact. She recovered quickly, her mask of condescending pity slipping back into place. "Now, Eliza, don't be like that," she began, her tone shifting to that of a patient adult correcting a difficult child. "It's just for the ceremony. What is the big deal?" The grandmother chimed in, her voice thin and reedy. "Family is the most important thing. You can't exclude family from a wedding." They began listing all the reasons we were wrong, their arguments weaving together into a familiar tapestry of guilt and obligation. They talked about tradition, about hurting Amy's feelings, about what people would think. As they spoke, I felt nothing but a profound sense of detachment. It was like watching a television show I had seen 100 times before. I already knew all the lines. Their words, once so effective at making me question myself, now had no power. They were just noise. I pushed my chair back from the table, the sound scraping loudly in the suddenly quiet room. I stood up. Conversation over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't wait for a response. I simply turned and walked out of the dining room, my steps even and measured. I could feel their stunned silence on my back. The debate was finished. The war had begun. Later that night, the house was thick with a tense, suffocating silence. My fiancé, Mark, found me in our office, where I was methodically sorting through place cards as if it were any other evening. He closed the door quietly behind him and came to stand by my desk, his expression a mixture of worry and awe. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. I looked up at him and gave a small, genuine smile. For the first time in a long time, I was more than okay. I was in control. "I am," I said. "The real question is, are we okay?" He took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We are," he said, and I knew he meant it. That single moment at the dinner table had changed everything for him, too. He had seen his mother's manipulation for what it was, and my refusal to play along had solidified his own resolve. We sat down together, not to argue or rehash the fight, but to strategize. The issue was no longer about two babies at a wedding. It was about the next 50 years of our lives. It was about whether we would be partners building our own future or subordinate actors in his mother's ongoing family drama. "They won't let this go," Mark said, stating the obvious. My mom's fatal flaw has always been her arrogance. She is 100% certain that she can wear you down, and that if she can't, she can pressure me until I break. She thinks I'll eventually give in. I always have. A plan began to form in my mind, clean and precise, like one of my wedding spreadsheets. Our revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. Shouting matches and slammed doors were their tactics, not ours. Our response would be quiet, meticulous, and professional. It would be a strategy they were completely unprepared for. The blueprint was simple. We would stop playing their game. Effective immediately, there would be no more justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining. The word no was a complete sentence, and it was the only one they were going to get from now on. Their power was entirely dependent on our emotional reaction. They fed on our frustration, our anger, our exhaustion. They thrived on the drama of a drawn-out fight. We decided, right then and there, to give them nothing. We would starve them of the attention they craved. We would proceed with our wedding plans as if their demands didn't exist. We would be polite, calm, and unmovable. We would let them escalate, let them throw tantrums, let them recruit other family members to their cause. And through it all, we would present a cool, united front. We would let them expose themselves through their own childish actions. We would let them self-destruct. And it happened faster than I ever could have imagined. Our plan was simple: do nothing. All we had to do was hold firm to our boundaries and let them unravel under the weight of their own entitlement. The first test came the very next morning. I was in the kitchen when the side door opened without a knock, and my sister-in-law, Amy, breezed in as if she owned the place. It was a small act of dominance, a reminder that she didn't see our home as ours. The old me would have said nothing, swallowing my annoyance to keep the peace. The new me was different. I waited a few minutes, then picked up my phone. I sent her a polite, simple text. "Hi, Amy, in the future, could you please just knock or ring the bell before coming in? Thanks so much." It was non-confrontational but clear. Her response came back almost immediately. It was bizarrely cold and corporate, as if we were business rivals negotiating a contract. "Message received. Your request for future entry protocol has been noted and will be adhered to." I stared at the message, a small smile playing on my lips. The games had begun. The big move came the day before the wedding. We had planned a casual backyard barbecue for all the family and friends who were helping us set up the venue. At noon, my mother-in-law sent a group text. "Change of plans," it read cheerfully. "Amy and I will be hosting a get-together at her place tonight to make sure Grandma is comfortable before the big day. See you all there." It was a blatant attempt to hijack our event and divide the family. Mark and I looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. We would not engage. We would not argue. Mark simply replied to the group, "Thanks for the offer, Mom, but our thank you barbecue is at our house at 6. We'll see you then." They showed up at 7:30, long after everyone else had eaten. They stood awkwardly in the yard, making a show of not touching any of the food. "Oh, we already ate," my mother-in-law announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "We had a lovely, quiet dinner at Amy's." Something felt off. A few of Mark's cousins, who had sworn they would be there to help us set up, had never arrived. Later that night, a nagging suspicion sent me to my laptop to check the security camera footage from our driveway. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the bright afternoon sun, was Amy's husband, directed by my mother-in-law, loading 24 of our folding chairs into the back of their truck. They had come to our house while we were out picking up supplies, stolen our property for their secret party, and then actively told their side of the family not to come help us. They had tried to sabotage our entire wedding setup. Mark and I spent the next 4 hours setting up the entire venue by ourselves. We unfolded every table, tied every sash on every chair, and arranged every centerpiece. We were fueled by adrenaline and a grim, unifying sense of satisfaction. They had played every manipulative card they had to ruin our day, but all they had managed to do was prove us right. The next day, we got married, and despite their best efforts, it was beautiful. The sun was shining, our friends were joyful, and the love in the air was so thick you could feel it. Their defeat was just as palpable. My mother-in-law stood in the back during the ceremony, her face a mask of stone. She refused to speak to me or even look in my direction. During the family photos, the tension was comical. Amy stood apart from the group, arms crossed, until one of my aunts physically had to push her into the frame. She looked like she was being forced to pose with a mortal enemy. Their grand power play had failed spectacularly, leaving them with no moves left except a sullen, bitter retreat. And retreat they did. Immediately after dinner, they were gone. I was talking to a friend when I noticed their tables were empty. It wasn't just them, it was the entire side of my husband's family. They had vanished without a single goodbye, before the speeches, before our first dance, before we even cut the cake. Hours later, as the party was still going strong, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother-in-law. "Had to leave," it said. "I was feeling cold." I glanced at the thermostat on the venue wall. It was 69 degrees. It was the flimsiest, most pathetic excuse I had ever heard. They couldn't control our wedding, so they tried to punish us by leaving. They thought their absence would cast a dark shadow over our celebration. But as I stepped onto the dance floor with my new husband, surrounded by the smiling faces of people who were genuinely happy for us, I realized they hadn't punished us at all. In their desperate, final act of spite, they had only punished themselves. In their desperate, final act of spite, they had only punished themselves. And in the quiet days that followed our wedding, the truth of that settled over our home like a peaceful dawn. The suffocating tension that had lingered for 5 years was gone, replaced by a profound and welcome silence. A few days later, my husband and I sat at our dining room table, the same table where the final battle had been declared. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The stress was gone, replaced by an unbreakable sense of partnership. We had faced the fire together and had come out stronger. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. I saw a new kind of determination in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. He had spent his entire life trying to please them, to avoid their disapproval. Now, having seen their true colors displayed in such a spectacularly ugly fashion, he was finally ready. He was free. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice calm and steady, "about my parents, about them living here." I squeezed his hand, my own thoughts aligning perfectly with his. Our conversation wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. The hurt was a given, but dwelling on it was pointless. This was about strategy. It was about building the future we deserved. "I have too," I replied. "This can't continue. We can't start our marriage with them down the hall, waiting for the next opportunity to undermine us." It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. The wedding was just the symptom. The disease was their corrosive need for control, and it was a disease we had to cut out of our lives completely. Their campaign of disrespect and sabotage had a price. We weren't interested in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. That was their style, not ours. Our response would be the same way we had handled the wedding drama: quiet, professional, and absolute. Their total ruin would be quiet and legal. As the planner, I had already looked into the logistics. "They've lived here for 5 years," I said, laying out the facts. "Legally, they are tenants, even without a lease or paying rent. We can't just ask them to leave." Mark nodded, his jaw set. He knew what was coming next. "There's a formal process," I continued. "We can serve them with a written 30-day notice to vacate. It's not a request. It's not up for debate or negotiation. It's an official legal document." The idea was clean, simple, and beautifully impersonal. It removed all emotion from the equation, which was the only field they knew how to fight on. They couldn't use guilt trips or passive aggression against a legal notice. It was a wall they could not breach. "Do it," Mark said without a moment's hesitation. The relief in his voice was immense. He wasn't just agreeing with me. He was taking charge of his own life, finally drawing the line that should have been drawn years ago. And so, the final phase of our plan was set in motion. The consequences of their actions would be delivered not in a heated argument, but in a plain white envelope. They would lose their rent-free housing. They would lose their comfortable safety net, the one that allowed them to meddle and manipulate without fear of repercussion. But most importantly, they would lose the easy, unfiltered access to the son they tried so desperately to control. That, I knew, would be the cruelest blow of all. Their entire world was built on maintaining their influence over him, and we were about to demolish it. Our new life has begun. It is a life built on a foundation of mutual respect, partnership, and the quiet strength of a single, powerful word. No! We learned its value the hard way, but it has become the cornerstone of our marriage and our home. Their future, however, is one of their own making. It is a future of isolation and consequences, a future spent wondering how they lost everything. And the answer will always be the same, whether they are willing to see it or not. They lost it all because they couldn't bear for one single day to not be about them.